By the end of this video, your heart would have pumped 1,500 times. And in those 1,500 times, it would have pumped 35 gallons worth of blood throughout your body. And those 35 gallons of blood equates to about 300 pounds of force. So even if you're just sitting here while watching this video, are you still working out? Your heart would probably say, yes, you are. Hey guys, Organized Biology here, and today we're doing a comprehensive overview of the cardiovascular system. So, as we go through it, we're going to go through some functions after I just gave you some fun facts. Then we're going to go through the components and the heart layers. So, what are the parts of the cardiovascular system and how is the heart layered? From there, we're going to talk about the circulation of blood throughout your body. We'll have two main circuits we'll talk about. Then we're going to talk about the anatomy of the heart and the blood flow through the heart itself, concluding in the conduction system, because your heart is beating without you knowing it. Okay, so let's get started. So to get started, let's actually break down the word itself. Cardiovascular system. Anytime we're talking about an organ system, we're talking about multiple organs working together for a common purpose. And the two main organs we're going to talk about here are in the first word. Cardio refers to the organ, the heart. This is where we get our term cardio exercise, as you're working out your heart. But vascular also means vessels. So together, the heart and vessels compose the cardiovascular system. Now, what I want you to remember is that the heart is the pump and the vessels are the pipes. Okay, the pump and the pipes for blood. So let's get into those functions, and they're all going to have to do with the blood specifically. So number one, the main function of the heart is to pump oxygen-rich blood throughout the body to feed the cells. Remember, you have about 30 trillion cells in your body, all needing a blood supply in some way, shape, or form so that they can get nutrients and oxygen in order to do their functions. And number two is similar to number one, but here's the problem. Once we drop off the oxygen and the nutrients to the cells, the blood is actually going to increase in toxins, wastes, and carbon dioxide. So some of the toxins and waste will get filtered out by the kidneys, but we need to get some more oxygen back into the blood, and we need to expel the carbon dioxide that was made from our cells. So the second function is to pump the low oxygen blood to the lungs to eventually expel CO2 and pick up oxygen. Okay, so already we're seeing kind of this dynamic of we have to drop off oxygen, pick up carbon dioxide at the cells, and then take it back to the lungs so that we can get the oxygen back into the blood and the carbon dioxide out. And that's going to come into these circulations as well. Now, the third function I'll mention here, although the heart has several other functions and the vessels do other things, the third one that I talk about in my classes is dealing with body temperature. The blood is the main regulator of body temperature. So for example, when you are really warm, you will see your vessels actually dilating, getting bigger to let off more heat so you can cool off. And vice versa, when you're really cold, your blood vessels will actually shrivel up, constrict, to keep the heat in by keeping the blood more near the internal organs. So let's move on into the components of the cardiovascular system as well as the heart layers. So in talking about the components of the cardiovascular system, obviously the main component is the heart itself. However, the pipes themselves have several different names to tell you what they are and what they do. So when the heart beats, okay, blood will get ejected from the heart and will immediately go into vessels called arteries. I always think of arteries starting with A because they're going away from the heart, okay? So once they get to the arteries, they are going to branch off and go even smaller. So the arteries are really big. The next ones will be a little smaller. And that's why these next ones are called arterioles. So once again, artery with the ol means little artery. Okay, so if arteries were, say, this very large tube, the arterioles will be very small branched off tubes. Okay, so the arterioles are smaller. Finally, it's going to end up in the capillaries. So the blood will end up in the capillaries, and this is where the magic happens. This is where oxygen, waste, and nutrients are exchanged between the cells and the blood. So the capillaries are an incredibly important structure. And if you want to learn more about how the blood actually feeds the cells, I'm going to link my capillary exchange video right here. Please watch that. It'll explain it in further detail. Now, once all these waste gases, nutrients have been exchanged, we're going to start coming back towards the heart through venules. This literally means tiny vein, which is the bigger vessel that it will eventually get to, are the veins. And the veins will move blood back towards the heart, eventually ending up in the heart itself, and then the cycle returns over. Okay? Now, with all of these, notice how it's a one-way circuit. We can't go back. And the reason we can't do that is because of structures called valves. Okay, so for example, blood is going to be traveling through this artery this direction. Okay, there will be little tiny valves that are in the arteries themselves that when the blood is pumped through it, forced through it, it's basically the point of no return. Once it goes through that valve, it can't go back. So these valves prevent backflow. And we're also going to see that in the heart tissue itself, the heart structures. So those are the components of the cardiovascular system, the heart and the vessels. Now, let's move on into the layers of the heart. I have drawn 4 here, okay? The outermost layer of the heart, right here in the dotted lines, is called the pericardium. If you break down the word, peri refers to around the outside, like a perimeter of land is around the outside. So this is around the heart, and there's 2 main parts. There is the fibrous pericardium, and there is the serous pericardium. Now, the fibrous pericardium is kind of in the name. It's very fibrous and tough, okay? This does 2 things. It protects the heart, as well as preventing the heart from overextending, because this is a contracting muscle, and we don't want it to overextend too much. So both protection and prevention from overextending. Awesome. Now the serous pericardium. You may have heard of serous membranes before. I like to think of these as the WD-40 of your internal organs. Why is that? Well, because WD-40 is an oil, okay? And this allows basically a frictionless surface between the organ itself and all the other structures. You see, the heart actually lays in the thoracic cavity, kind of off to the left. And it's bumped up right against the ribs and the lungs and a lot of other muscles and structures inside of your body. And as it's beating, you want it to beat without any friction, because if friction occurs, there'd be some inflammation and pain. So you want a frictionless surface, and that is due to this serous pericardium. There will be a serous fluid that allows a smooth gliding surface, especially as the heart is contracting. Awesome. So that's the pericardium. Moving on, inwardly, there is just a very thin layer right on the inside of the pericardium called the epicardium. This is the actual heart tissue itself, and it's just a connective tissue layer along the outside, because epi refers to on top of, so it's on top of the heart. And as we move in, the thickest layer, and probably the most important layer, is going to be this red, which is the myocardium. Myo refers to muscle, so this is where the heart tissue lies, the heart muscle tissue lies. Now, a couple things you need to know about the heart tissue right now. Number 1, it is striated. That means that there are basically striations, little stripes in the muscle itself, and they're all going to shorten, get closer together, and make the heart contract. Furthermore, the heart has a wrapped around striated muscle. Okay? What does that mean? Well, the muscle itself wraps around the heart, so that way when the heart contracts, the heart actually twists and twists and twists. And that's going to help the heart eject as much blood as possible. Because think about it. Say you have like a washcloth filled with water, right? And you want to wring it out, okay? If you just squeeze it like this, straight up, you'll get some water out, right? But if you grab it and then twist it, then you'll have a lot more water leak out. The same holds true here with the heart. When the heart beats and wants to get blood out of it, it needs to twist and spin and contract so that it ejects as much blood as possible. So myocardium, it's striated, and it's also spindle-shaped. It kind of wraps around the heart. Now on the inside of the heart, we have this blue, not actually blue, but I think of blue as smooth because this is the endocardium. Endo refers to inside, so this is actually the inside layer of the heart. This is what the blood is going to be touching. And the reason it is smooth is because that smooth surface will allow blood to glide across it really easily. So it's basically like a You know how like you can pour pop in it or pour like soda or pop depending on which part of the United States you live in, and if you dump it out, it's going to kind of like glug 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 out a lot. Whereas if you just pour out a little bit, it'll be a nice smooth flow. Well, the endocardium allows for that nice smooth flow where there's no like gurgling or bubbling of the blood itself as it's inside the heart. Awesome. So those are the layers of the heart. So now we're going to talk about the heart's two main circulations, okay? As we talk about the circuitry of the heart, I divided the heart up into four major quadrants, okay? Now, if you look at the heart, I want you to make sure that it's as if you are looking at the person, okay? So if this was my heart, this would actually be the right side, and this would be the left side. This is how it's usually shown in textbooks, so don't get too confused. It's as if you're looking at the person. Now, on the top right, okay, this will be the right atria, and this will be the right ventricle. And this side of the heart exists to pump to the pulmonary circuit. Now, the pulmonary circuit means the lungs. So the right side of the heart deals with pumping blood to the lungs. So how does that work? Well, there will be blood that was just delivered to the body tissues, lost its oxygen. Okay, so now it's deoxygenated, and we need to get oxygen back. So the blood will enter in from the body and go into the right atria, okay? Once it does that, it's going to pass through a valve we'll talk about here in a second and go to the right ventricle where it will then be pumped to the lungs. And at the lungs, it will pick up oxygen. Now the blood is ready to be pumped to the body. Which side of the heart do you think deals with that? You only have one other option. It's the left side. This is called the systemic circulation. And that means the left side of the heart is going to exist to pump blood to the body. So now after the blood's gotten to the lungs, it is oxygenated. So I'm going to draw it in red. And this blood from the lungs is going to enter into the left atria. From there, it'll pass through a valve and exit out the left ventricle and go to the body. So guys, remember this term. Ready? Heart to body, heart to lungs. Heart to body, heart to lungs. Heart to body, heart to lungs. That's what those circuits are. They're two separate circuits, pulmonary to get to the lungs, systemic to get to the body, so that we deliver oxygen and nutrients to the body, pick them back up at the lungs, etc. Great. So now that we have kind of a feel of where blood is going through the heart, let's actually take it through the actual structures itself. So this is what we're going to do. It's going to be kind of fun. We're going to have a little blood cell. We can name him Fred. So there's Fred the blood cell, and we're going to follow his movements through the heart to the lungs, to the heart, to the body. And we're going to follow his movements throughout the whole body circulation. So let's check this out. And as we go through it, we're going to label specific structures in the heart that you do need to know. All right? So first off, the blood cell will begin in the right atria. From there, the blood cell will travel through a specific valve. Now, this valve is on the right side of the heart, between the atria and the ventricles. This is called the tricuspid valve. I remember this because it has "ri" in it, so it's on the right side. And it's also known as the right AV valve. This is because it's the right side between the atria and the ventricles, okay? So same thing, two different words. Now, we get to the right ventricle. Once in the right ventricle, we are going to pump to where? To the lungs, remember? So we're going to go through the lungs, and that is through an easy term, this big blood vessel here. This is called the pulmonary artery. Why is it called the pulmonary artery? Well, it's dealing with going to the lungs, and it's an artery because it's going away from the heart. So keep that in mind. This is the pulmonary artery. So as it exits the pulmonary artery, it can choose one of two directions. Where do you think these go? Well, probably to one of the two lungs that you have, right? That's why it branches off into two different directions, okay? So from here, it's going to go to the lungs. So now once it goes to the lungs, it's going to pick up oxygen. Now we need to get it back to the heart, right? So we're going to bring that blood cell back from the lungs through these blood vessels here. These are called pulmonary veins. Why? Because they came from the lungs and veins return blood to the heart. Okay, so we're bringing the blood cell back through these pulmonary veins. Here he comes. So now we need to get him to the body, right? So we're going to get him into the left side of the heart. So he's going to come in here to the left atria, and he's going to move through a valve once again. This valve has 3 different names, so be prepared for any of those 3. The bicuspid valve, it could also be called the mitral valve, or the left AV valve. You may be wondering, what the heck, why all these names? Well, bicuspid, it has 2 little cusps if you look inside of it. Mitral refers to the mitre that I believe the Pope wore, and so they were like, hey, that kind of looks like that valve we cut open in that heart right there. So they called it a mitre or a mitral valve. And then left AV valve, left atrioventricular valve. So either way, it means the same thing. Great. So once we get in the left atria through the left AV valve, we're going to now be in the left ventricle. Okay? Something I want you to notice here in the left ventricle that I drew for a purpose is this left side myocardium, so this would all be filled with heart muscle, as compared to the right side of the heart. Which one is thicker? So looking at both sides, which side is thicker? Well, probably this left side, because it's pumping to the body. That includes the top of your head to the tips of your toes. Whereas the right ventricle is only pumping to the lungs, right? So to the lungs, it's not very far away from the heart. It doesn't need to be as thick and strong. So structure fits function, right? So now we're in the left ventricle. We are going to take Fred, and he is going to go out through this massive artery. This massive artery here is called the aorta. The aorta is as wide as a garden hose, really, really big artery, okay? So this artery loops around. This is the aortic arch right here. And there will be 3 branches off the artery going towards the head. And then part of it will actually descend behind the heart and eventually go to more inferior body regions, okay? So depending on, once again, which route it takes, it might go up, might go down. Either way, it'll feed part of the body, okay? So goes to the body, drops off the oxygen once again. So now we have deoxygenated blood, and we need to get it back to the heart to get it to the lungs. How do we do that? Through one of 2 major veins. This one is called the superior vena cava, and that's if the blood is draining from the top, or the inferior vena cava, if the blood was draining from the inferior part of the body. So we'll say he went down to the toes, now he's coming back through here. And where will he end up? Back at the right atrium to do the whole cycle over again. So that is the blood flow through the heart to the body, back to the heart to the lungs, back to the heart, back to the body, back to the heart, back to the lungs. You see this sort of back and forth, right? Awesome. So now the last thing we need to go through for the cardiovascular system, guys, is the conduction system. So before we get into the conduction system, real quick, if this has been helpful for you so far, please like the video so they can get to more people, so they can understand this process better. And if you want to get some more information on A&P and biology, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'll be happy to make any and all videos that would be helpful to you. So go ahead and drop them in the comments below, and I'll make them for you. Awesome. Now, before we get into the conduction system, real quick, I want you to know that this is not kind of a one-sided process. No, the heart beats in the following manner, where both the atria will contract first at the same time, and right after that, the ventricles will contract. Somehow we have to coordinate the muscles so that they will contract the top first in the atria, and then the bottom in the ventricles right afterwards, okay? So how do we do this? We do it through the cardiac conduction system. So here's how it works. First off, we will have a node sitting in the right atria. This node is called the SA, or sinoatrial node. So the sinoatrial node is a collection of nervous tissue. And if you don't know what nervous tissue is, go ahead and watch my video on the nervous system. It's talking about how these cells send signals to different tissues, and this is a great example of that. So these cells will send an electrochemical impulse, okay? Think of like an impulse, like a little signal. And this signal will be sent in a bunch of different directions. It'll be sent across over to the left atria, as well as down towards this other node, but also throughout this atria itself. But notice it is not going down to the ventricles. It stays in the atria. Okay, so what this does is it stimulates these cardiac myocytes, the muscle cells of the heart, to contract in what's called a syncytium all together. Okay? So this induces atrial contractions together. Key word there, together. It all has to happen at the same time to keep that contraction smooth, okay? Now, about literally 0.1 seconds later, this node will hit this node, okay? So that impulse will reach this node, and this is an easy one to remember because it's called the atrioventricular node, because it sits between the atria and the ventricles, otherwise shortened as the AV node. Once again, collection of nervous tissue, it will send a signal down this little branch, okay? Now, this is going to travel and branch off, okay, into the left and right bundles, eventually branching off into both the right and the left ventricles through what's called the Purkinje fibers. So as the signal travels down and around, it will simultaneously initiate the ventricles to contract together once again. So really important, sinoatrial node starts this whole process, right? Spontaneously depolarizes, stimulates itself, sends the signal to the atria to contract. All the blood at that moment, remember this, will pass through down into the ventricles. So the atria contract, push the blood into the ventricles, and then as the impulse travels down through the Purkinje fibers, the ventricles will get excited and they'll contract, and then the blood will exit the heart either through, remember, the aorta, if it's on the left side, or the pulmonary artery, if it's on the right side. Wonderful. So that's the electrical conduction system of the heart. The last two terms you should probably know for the cardiovascular system are the terms called systole and diastole. You may have heard of these because they deal with blood pressure, because we measure systolic blood pressure, like 120, over diastolic blood pressure, about 80, okay? But what systole literally means is that the heart is contracting. Okay, so as these atria and ventricles are contracting, that's considered the systolic pump of the heart, the systolic period. Whereas the diastole means the heart is at rest. So that is when there are no impulses firing, and that's when the heart muscle is relaxed and not contracting. Systole and diastole. If you want to learn more about blood pressure, though, specifically, watch my cardiac output video. I talk about what influences the heart, as well as how we can actually affect these nodes to either speed up the heart rate or stimulate more contractions or decrease the heart rate. It's a really good video to watch there. But guys, hey, if this has been helpful, once again, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching.